Back to another episode of the Debrief. I'm back with my friend John Burgman of Climbing Magazine and Climbing Business Journal and whatever else pays writers to write about rock climbing. Also, he has that book. I always forget for like a second to pitch your book. High Drama, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of American Comp Climbing. You can find it in the link in the description box below. And our special guest today is none other than the incredible Alannah Yip, Canada's poster girl of competition climbing, and now an Olympian at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. Thank you, Alannah, so much for taking some time out of your presumably busy schedule to come hang out with us for a bit.
Well, of course. Glad to chat.
Yeah, so the gist of this show is we usually kind of recap World Cup events and just talk about what's going on in the world of climbing, but there's honestly not that much. So we're going to probably hit some bases really quick, and then we're just going to ask you a lot about your experience climbing. So to start off with the news, I don't really want to go into this too much, but at this point, pretty much everything has been postponed or canceled. We just saw the most recent one. I should have checked the pronunciation for the capital city of Slovenia. Go for it. Say again?
Ljubljana.
Ljubljana. Awesome. There you go. So they just canceled their World Cup. It was replacing the Kron World Cup while I think they were redoing that wall. And unfortunately, it looks like I can't remember if they postponed or canceled. At this point, I think the only one is Xiamen, which hasn't been officially canceled or postponed at this point. But I mean, I guess it's kind of what we expected. There's still a chance that some World Cups might happen later on in the year, but it's a sad realization that, you know, this whole everything we look forward to this year is kind of falling by the wayside. Alannah, for yourself, I don't know if you even planned on competing in World Cups this year once you were declared an Olympian. How does this affect what your plans originally were?
I did plan on doing a few just as tune-ups for the Olympics. I was going to do maybe, I think Innsbruck was supposed to be a boulder lead one, and then Salt Lake, because it's basically my home World Cup. It's so close. I don't know. It depends what the schedule looks like in the fall. If we have any World Cups, I'll have to make the decision as the competitions are announced, kind of thing.
What would draw you to one at this point? Like, assuming you don't have to worry about your health or anything like that, if it was just like a normal World Cup, what would draw you to it at this point?
Getting experience competing in multiple disciplines. And yeah, if it was in Salt Lake, having it be closer to home and just a competition tune-up. Because by the time there's a World Cup, you know, I'll have been one of the last people to have competed, really, but it still will have been more than 6 months. So,
yeah. The other thing is that the tripartite spot for the qualification has been, I don't want to say it was awarded, it was kind of deferred, isn't the word, John? Reallocated. There it is. Yeah. So the tripartite commission, basically a reserve spot that can be used to get climbers to the Olympics that may not have had whatever resources to help get their athletes there. And apparently nobody applied for that fit the criteria or something like that. I know in an interview with Beta Route Setting, Marco Scaleras had mentioned that in the summer of last year that the list of countries that were eligible was published, but I guess none of those countries applied for it, according to the statements that we got. So those spots were reallocated, and they went to Annick Jobert of France and Michael Pico-Ruaz of Italy. This was an interesting one. I know, John, you mentioned, first of all, like Fanny Gibert being somebody that had like a really excellent last couple of seasons and might be seen as somebody that could do really well at the European Championship, and her like heartbreaking public, you know, just Instagram post talking about how it felt was really hard to see. And later on, as I was looking through the qualification pathway document, it does mention that like the intent of the system is that the tripartite places would be confirmed after the rest of the qualification pathway has been decided. That's not the exact words, but it did feel like it kind of threw a wrench in the European Championships. I kind of wish it had been saved until later, because as much as both of them did well at Worlds, I feel like it the point of the system was to give each continent a chance to qualify somebody, a last chance qualifier like Alannah, you got yourself. And it made for the best competition we've probably seen in a long time, with one of the most memorable moments. And it feels kind of bad that some of the favorite athletes won't get a chance to earn their spot that way. So it's a bummer for somebody like Fanny. I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead.
Or Stefano.
Yeah, Stefano Gisolfi as well. Yeah, it like for somebody like yourself, you just managed to miss out on any of this drama. Your qualification pathway was undisturbed. I don't know if you have any thoughts, or if you've heard how different athletes feel about this kind of thing.
I mean, it is unfortunate. I do think that, yeah, the intent was originally to reallocate the tripartite spot after all the continental championships. But then they had a decision, do they go against their original timeline that was set out in the qualification pathway document, which opens up to people like Anouk and Misha Pickleraz sort of complaining that wasn't fair, or do they postpone it along with all the other continental championships, other than, of course, Pan Americans? I think it was a hard decision, I'm sure. I wasn't.
Well, let me ask, like, for you guys, do you think there is a trade-off? Because I can't see a rationale for not just waiting until all of the championship qualifiers are over, right? Could you not have just waited until Europe gets it out of the way, and Oceania and Asia? Like, what's the benefit, aside from that Michael and Anna get this extra lead-up time, which is nice, but not like the people earlier in the qualification pathway aren't even going to get that. It's one that like kind of breaks me a little bit. And I definitely understand that all of this is unprecedented. Like the IFSC first has never dealt with an Olympics before, but also the first one that they get is thrown into like chaos. That's rough. I completely sympathize with that, but I can't help but feeling like this one kind of went against the grain of the like intent and the method of it.
Yeah, I agree. I personally don't think that it was entirely fair. I think, and optically too, to give away or allocate spots in the Olympics in the middle of a global pandemic, it's not the greatest. But I wasn't involved in the decision at all. Yeah.
Let's get to some actual questions. John, I'm going to let you just lead off. We've got a million questions, and we'll try and narrow it down to the most pertinent 100 or whatever. So let's get into it. We'll just get to chat a bit.
Sure. Well, I guess for starters, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, Alannah, and specifically, childhood, growing up, discovering climbing, and then sort of realizing that you wanted to compete. Something that Tyler and I were talking about when we were formulating this interview was that we've read in interviews that you were friends with Sean McCall when you were really young. And something that I said to Tyler, I said, how is it that in a country as huge as Canada, the two best climbers, the two Olympian climbers, were like neighborhood friends? That just is serendipitous, but even beyond that, it's almost unbelievable. So I'd just love to hear if that is folklore or if that is indeed true.
It's true. So our parents were actually friends since they went to university together at the University of British Columbia, long before we were born. And so I've actually known Sean since the day I was born. And I didn't have, I don't have any older siblings, and Sean and his brother were basically my stand-in older siblings. I looked up to them as much as older cousins or older siblings. And so when they started climbing, I also wanted to start climbing. I also, Sean was really good at math and skipped a grade in math. And so I had to do that too, and that sort of thing. It wasn't just climbing, but I kind of wanted to do everything they did. Except for soccer. I was terrible at soccer because I didn't like running.
Did you? So your interest in climbing was entirely based on the McCall boys. It wasn't your parents weren't climbers, or nobody in your family was climbers, or anything like that.
Nope. It was the McCalls that took me climbing for the first time, and I loved it. And that's why, I continued. I signed up for a summer course and then joined the youth team, obviously at a much lower, the more recreational level than what Sean and Jason were at. But, it was the McCalls that took me to begin with. But I really did fall in love with the sport immediately. And, as I progressed through the sport, Sean and Jason really showed me where you could take it. They went to every Youth World Championships that they were eligible for. And of course, Sean won most of those. And that was pretty inspiring. So.
Tell me a bit about... Sorry, go ahead, John.
Sorry, I was going to say, when did you realize... it's one thing to love climbing. It's another thing to kind of realize that you're pretty darn good at it, to say the least. So when did that awareness come, that you were actually better than a lot of other people that were doing it?
So the funny thing is that my path in climbing and Sean's path in climbing are very, very different. I wasn't that good at climbing. I did get to go to all the Youth World Championships that I was eligible for, but back in those days, my category, I was competing against like 5 other girls in the entire country for 4 spots at the Youth World Championships, that kind of thing. I wasn't that good. And it took me until university, when I actually took a break from climbing after I aged out of youth. I had thought about trying to do the World Cup circuit, but I didn't think, or I knew at that point I wasn't good enough. And the only person I ever knew who did that was Sean, and he was so much better than me. I just looked at that and I was like, this probably isn't for me. I'll go to university, get a degree, get a good job. And then halfway through that, realized that I was pretty miserable without climbing. I actually did an exchange semester in Switzerland, where I proceeded to not really study at all and just train with the local team there. I got to train with, Petra Klingler and a bunch of other amazing athletes from that area who were all around my age. And that was really the point at which I realized that I could keep up with them. And they were all World Cup semifinalists. So I went, I want to do that too. I want another shot at this.
If I remember right, didn't you win some Youth World Championships though? I want to say no. Okay, sorry, Youth National Championships. I think I absolutely messed that up in my head. Okay, so you won some Youth National Championships. There's a great picture, and I couldn't find it. I really wanted to pull it up for this, of yourself and Sean crawling all over Andrew Wilson when you guys were very, very little, right? Like this is before, I'm sure before both of you were climbing, or at least climbing competitively. You were very small. So first of all, what is the origin of that relationship? And were you in this kind of coaching and athlete relationship with Andrew Wilson as well during your teenage years?
Not my teenage years, but so I met Andrew when he started coaching Sean. He actually lived in Sean's basement for a while, in their basement suite, with his wife, and him and his wife even babysat me a few times. I was 4 or 5 years old, very, very young. So that was for sure before I started climbing. But Sean had just started, I think, recently, in the previous couple of years. And then he was the head coach of the youth team, and I worked with him a bit when I started climbing when I was about 9, 10. And we worked together probably for about 5 or 6 years. Before he left that team. So I can't help but for a long time.
It just seems like, I mean, I'm thinking of sort of like the nature versus nurture discussion, and especially since you said you weren't, by your own, admission, you weren't good right away, or you weren't great, and yet it just seems like sort of circling around you, around your sphere, not only the McCalls, but then Andrew Wilson. It's kind of like there were all these components were in place to make you great, sort of by just being around them and working with them.
Yeah, so I think I was super, super lucky to have Andrew as my first coach, and the group of coaches, not just Andrew, but the whole group of coaches that I had from the time I was 8, 9, all the way up through my teenage years. I'm still friends with some of them, quite a few of them actually, and they're still huge parts of the community here. And there was so much focus on technique and not just strength building and not just competing, but being good climbers and good people. And it's really a result of the influence of many, many amazing climbers and amazing people that made me the climber and the person I am today. And as well, my parents, they were never pushy, especially not being climbers. They never pushed me into the sport. Everything I did was for me. Yeah.
I want to ask, like, you, so I don't know how much I need to preface this, but basically back when you were like an up and coming teenage climber, in those days, the Canadian youth comp scene and the Canadian adult comp scene as well was for the most part dominated by British Columbia, right?
Alberta.
Okay, sure. That's which unfortunately has seemed like just an unbelievable plummet for some reason. But the West was the dominant region in terms of competitors, and over time that's like evened out a little bit as just more gyms have opened out east, and the coaching stock has slowly gotten better. But one thing you guys are always going to have that we really don't have is any sense of mountain culture out there, right? There is outdoor climbing in Canada and Quebec. A lot of it's really good, and there's enthusiastic scenes, but it's not like an ingrained part of the culture of living here. It is a fringe thing, whereas out where you are, it's something you're always confronting. You look out your window and there's a huge freaking range of mountains, right? As this like goes over time, and as all these provinces in different parts of Canada grow in climbing, are you guys always going to have this advantage just from having this kind of geographical leg up? Is that something that you think will always keep BC and maybe Alberta towards the top?
In the competition scene you're talking about?
Yeah, specifically a comp scene.
I don't think so. I think that it's got so much to do about the culture of the gym and the coaches that, I mean, you already see Quebec and Ontario catching up very well. And competition climbing these days is so different from outdoor climbing, especially with the multiple disciplines and, modern style bouldering. It's not the same. I mean, if we were talking about the progression of outdoor climbing, yes, I think that people who live in BC, obviously, and Alberta are going to have a leg up just because, they have the proximity to it. But with gyms opening up all over the country and good coaches are, everywhere now, I think that BC and Alberta are not going to have an advantage really in the future.
As an Ontario boy, that's what I'm hoping for as well. Well, all of us East Coast people resent everything about West Coast climbing. But anyway, so one other thing before we kind of move on to other stuff was this relationship between Sean McCall and Andrew Wilson is a very long one from when they were little all the way currently till now. For anybody that doesn't know, Andrew Wilson still coaching Alannah and Sean in some capacity, but also just the national coach for Canada. Between those two, if you wanted to give kind of an insight in the relationship between the two of them, do you feel like their progression of both of their careers was, I'm sure to some extent heavily influenced by each other, but would you be willing to say that Andrew was one that was really pushing Sean higher and higher, or that maybe Sean was actually pushing Andrew higher? Is there kind of like one of those parties really being the engine for this? Because you seem to admit that Sean and Jason and eventually Andrew were kind of the ones helping push you higher in ways that maybe you didn't quite expect. But between the two of them, was there that kind of dynamic?
I don't think so. I think it was a very symbiotic relationship, and progression. I think one of the best things about Andrew as a coach is that he doesn't push you to do things. He inspires you to do things. So it really, in the end, it all comes from you. And that was, the same for me with Andrew. He gave me the most amazing foundation, along with all the other coaches I worked with when I was young, but the most amazing foundation in technique and athletic ability, just general athletic ability, that allowed me to continue to build on that as I got older. I don't think it was necessarily one of Sean or Andrew that pushed it. It was both of them together.
Okay.
When you say, Alannah, that the foundation was the technique, and maybe the sort of desire to compete wasn't pushed upon you, it maybe came from like within. Then, do you consider yourself like a pretty competitive person naturally?
I'm moderately competitive, not always, and definitely not in all things. Especially now, because I recognize I'm not the absolute most competitive person. I tend to reserve my competitive spirit mostly for climbing, and most other things in my life I like to do just for fun. For example, if I'm biking or running, I'm pretty quick to be like, oh, it's fine. I don't need to push that hard.
That's interesting. So you're able to really compartmentalize the competitive streak, which would maybe get exhausting if you were competitive at everything. That'd be a hard way to live. But some people are like that.
Mental health thing for me.
Yeah.
Recognizing that it's not my strength to be competitive all the time.
So you stopped climbing competitively as you headed into university. What was your mindset about climbing when you made that decision? Because it sounds like you decided it probably wasn't going to be a big role in your future. Did you kind of expect, okay, I'm done with competitive climbing forever, probably? What was your outlook?
Yep, for sure. I was like, oh, it's time to get my engineering degree and get a job and, be a regular person. Climbing was fun, but it'll just be fun from now on. It was never on my radar to come back and compete. Like, I thought maybe I'd do some locals for fun, but.
Was it a decision where you were like, okay, I can go to university for this, or I can keep getting better and better? Or did you kind of see yourself as you had like kind of played out the climbing game? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't really have a sense of what continuing climbing could be like when I was like 17 or something.
When would this have been? Like 2010 or something like that? 2000.
I graduated high school in 2011.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay.
So,
gotcha. Yeah. Things were less developed at that point for sure.
Yeah, I had done 2 World Cups that year. One in Boulder, Colorado. It was the lead comp, and the one in Canmore, the bouldering comp. And I had made semis in both of them, and I was like, oh, that's okay, I guess. But I didn't see anybody else from Canada really pushing forward into that space. So it just didn't seem like a viable option for me. I was like, oh, I'm not European, so that's never going to work.
At that point, Sean was still fairly fresh as well in the World Cup game. Were you just like, this is an unformed question, but it sounds like Sean's provided kind of an idea of what the next step could be, or something that you can reach for. Did that kind of like go out in that moment where he hadn't quite hit that like big success, or it just seemed unreachable for yourself?
Well, I guess I always saw Sean as kind of another level. He had done so much better in youth, and he had been, so much more successful in both outdoor and competitive climbing. I just, I looked at him and I was like, well, I mean, there's Sean, but okay, is there anybody normal, like me that can do this?
Okay, so
when I thought, I'll just go to university. That was my plan my whole life.
So after that, you decide you really want to come back to climbing in some capacity. Can you talk about coming back to climbing and what that meant, but then also how you ended up in Switzerland?
So I just got back into climbing, I guess, really the summer after my second year, which was a super intensive year for mechanical engineering at UBC. And I just started getting back into it with an old friend from that I grew up climbing with. And really, it was just recreational at first. And then I think, September, October rolled around and I was like, the locals are starting back up. Oh, that would be fun. We had tons of fun when we were kids in them. And I think I might have won one of them. And going to Switzerland was actually, it was kind of random. It was completely random. I had planned to do a semester abroad I had actually started the planning for it when I was not climbing. And I chose Switzerland because it was in the middle of Europe, and I thought it would be easy to travel places. Maybe I should have looked up how expensive it was first. It was really stupid, but I did not choose it for climbing at all. And I ended up in a place with the most, amazing team that I got to train with, and I am friends with a bunch of them still. The team that I trained with there.
How did you end up integrating with those people? Because I'm guessing you arrive in Switzerland, back climbing a little bit, having a good time. How do you end up somehow integrating yourself with a bunch of people that are training for World Cups? Like, this was the elite Swiss squad. I'm guessing it wasn't for the entire country. I'm guessing it was just for like the eastern half of the country or something. I don't really know how they organize it there, but
technically it was the Zurich city team. So they actually organized by city. We called it like the Zurich regional team, and the different gyms would open them. Like, the team would train at all the different gyms basically on different days, and it was before I went. So I had made the decision to go to Switzerland a while before, but once I had that, like, I knew I was going to Switzerland. It was actually Commanda from the Boulders on the island that knew the head coach and got him in touch with me. And he is super nice and was really open to it. He was like, of course, come train with us. And he was actually the head coach of the Swiss national team at the time, and he's now the head coach of the German national team.
Knowing what you know now, Alannah, with just having been to a bunch of international competitions and kind of knowing more of the dynamics for various national teams, can you imagine a situation maybe where a national team like wouldn't be as receptive to somebody from another country like coming in and training, or is that usually, would that be probably accepted with any national squad?
I was pretty lucky, and this wasn't the national squad. I don't think I would have been able to, say, come into just randomly into the national team training facility had they had one at the time. But this was the regional, like the city team, coached by the national team coach, with a bunch of the national team athletes on it, or previous national team athletes. But yes, definitely some countries would not be as accommodating, because we actually did go train with, say, the French team. We did a team trip to Fontainebleau, and the French team opened up their facility, Karma, in Font, for us to go train with them. But I don't think now, as a member of the Canadian team, they would necessarily be as open to that.
That's something that I also wonder, as the Olympics continue and climbing continues to be an Olympic sport, if more of these federations will just kind of be a little more closed off and proprietary about their training and their, but maybe not. But I'm just kind of curious to see if that's an evolution of the global scene.
I think in some countries it can be, and in some countries it won't be. I've heard Slovenia is very open and welcoming to people coming to train there. Japan's fairly open, but I think that's mostly to people just coming to climb with certain people in the gyms. And yeah, I think the climbing culture is pretty strong all over the world, where it's pretty open and pretty accepting. So
what did you learn out in Switzerland? Like, what you mentioned that you realized, hey, I'm on par with some of these people who are doing things at World Cups. What about your climbing changed? And it was like, so you take a bit of time off for university, you start climbing again recreationally. It's kind of hard to go from 0 to World Cup. So I'm assuming there was some kind of gradual grade up, and then your time in Switzerland was like the awakening of the high level part of your climbing again. But what came out of that? Because you climbed again with like great coaches, great athletes. I think I saw Fred Nicole at one point that you were climbing with him. So what were the new things that were getting into your head?
I think it was amazing to climb with people with different strengths and weaknesses than I have, especially say getting to climb slab for pretty much the first time in my life, because growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, well, I guess I wasn't really climbing in the 90s, but in the 2000s there were no slab walls in, I can fairly safely say, the continent of North America.
Yeah.
So I remember,
well, the birthday party wall. Like if you get on the birthday party wall somehow, we call that a slab. But yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. So that was really new. All those techniques, and I didn't even become really that proficient in them by the time I left. But I learned a lot from the other athletes there, and just getting to push. Seeing that, oh, this girl can do this problem, and I know that I can beat her, if we're climbing on a 60-degree overhang every time, but she can do this problem, I should try to do that problem too. It was a really collaborative team. It was amazing, and we also climbed outside all the time together.
Was Sean McCall kind of like, were you in touch with him at this point as well? And was he sort of, coaxing you like, yeah, you should, try World Cups, or like, was he sort of encouraging your rediscovery of climbing at sort of the high level?
No, not really. I mean, we talked occasionally because we were family friends, but I think he was living in France at the time. Yeah, no, we didn't talk all that much until I think I went and watched the Munich World Cup that year, because a bunch of my Swiss friends and Canadian friends were competing, and I saw him there. And then, later that year, we started talking a lot more about doing World Cups and that sort of thing.
So you weren't done your university degree yet. You're still like in school, but you decide in 2016, I'm going to do the circuit, right? Like you are hopping back in for the first time since 2011. And from the get-go, you were planning on doing all of it. That's a really big step. Most people choose to do one or two close to home. Why did it become an all or nothing thing all of a sudden? Like the Olympics hadn't even been like confirmed at this point, right? That was going to come midway through the 2016 season. But in the winter of 2016, you're like, yeah, we're doing this thing. What's the deal?
I don't know the exact reason, but I did it the entire circuit with a really good friend of mine. So I said I went to the Munich World Cup to watch, and she was competing. So she's Canadian-Slovakian, and she was competing for Slovakia, Maria Chalkova. We had been good friends for quite a while. And when we were there, I was so inspired. I had wanted to compete so badly. And I honestly don't remember the exact reason, but we just made a pact during that competition. We were like, okay, next year we're doing it, the whole circuit. And luckily we could do it with Sean, so he could kind of show us the ropes, especially, traveling. That year there was a competition in India, 2 in China. So traveling in those places and not being alone was really nice, really comforting.
How was that team dynamic? I think I was at the Vail 2016 one, and I think you stayed separately. I think your family was actually down for that event, so you kind of stayed with Sean and the family. I think Malik was the team manager for that circuit, if I remember right. I know you weren't staying with the team at that particular World Cup, but how integrated were you with the rest of the team? What was that kind of dynamic like? I imagine you were one of the few consistent climbers at every event, and you would just kind of get some other Canadian climbers at each separate stop. Did you get to integrate with a lot of those people, or were you mostly kind of in a separate bubble with Sean and Maria?
It depended on the World Cup. A lot of times, to save money and whatnot, we'd stay together still. We'd rent a big Airbnb and stay all together. And even if not, we'd always hang out, all the Canadians together. So yeah, I think I seem to remember it, integrating pretty well. I think Elise did a lot of the World Cups that year, and Alison Vest did a few. So, and yeah, we were good friends. We had known each other since youth climbing days, so we hung out quite a bit.
All right. We're going to just, before we get to the Pan Am Championship stuff, we're kind of going out of the order that we expected, Sean, but I want to talk about 2017 in Chongqing when you became the first female Canadian to ever make it to the final round of a World Cup. First of all, was that something that you considered at the time a realistic goal? And once it happened, did it change your set of expectations for the rest of the season?
I thought it was a stretch goal at the time, but it was still a goal. And yeah, for sure, once it happened, I didn't expect to make finals every time, but I kind of expected that I would at least be a little more consistent in semifinals. And I wasn't. That year was pretty rough for me after that.
Why is that?
I had expectations, for sure. Going in, Chongqing was the first comp that I did that year. I think I had an exam during Meiringen. I'm pretty sure I didn't do Meiringen.
You weren't at Meiringen in 2017, no.
Okay. Awesome. I can't remember the year differences. Anyway, yeah, so I went into Chongqing having just come off my old training block, so I had zero expectations, really, but was pretty confident because I felt really good during my training block. Of course, training in North America or in Vancouver at the time, we didn't really have the comp style boulders. Andrew did, an amazing job of putting up what he could, but we didn't always have the space, or we never had clear wall space to put up stuff. But obviously it worked well.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that's remarkable there is that I know from talking to a bunch of American climbers, and I know some European climbers, that like competing in China in general is, a lot of them don't like it, or they find it a challenge because just for a number of reasons. From the culture is different, the crowd is different, the finding food can be challenging, or I should say like finding food that fits their nutrition needs and whatnot. But obviously, like you didn't have any problem there. Is it? Or maybe I should ask, did you notice a difference in those aspects, like the crowd, the food,
I don't know. The crowd is pretty good there. They've built this specific like climbing. They call it a climbing park. So it's on top of a hill. It's got like beautiful greenery around, and for that city, like there's really no greenery. So, and it's a really nice facility, relatively. It gets really hot, like really hot, can be 30 degrees Celsius or more than 30 degrees Celsius, and the sun will be directly on the wall for part of the day. In 2016, they had a temporary venue in Chongqing, and they had black mats. And I remember going out, and I made the decision to get back on the wall after about 5 seconds of resting after falling, because my feet were burning through my shoes. And when I took them off later, I had blisters.
That's like an infamous comp with the black mats. Like that's sort of like a notoriously known in people's mind as just, horrible.
Yeah. But the thing about the Chinese World Cups is all the holds are also new to everybody except for the Chinese team.
Yeah.
I think it levels the playing field a lot. Oftentimes when we go to Europe, we'll be looking and be like, oh, wow, like that's a new hold. I've never seen that one before, or that one, or that one, or that one. And you know, a bunch of the other teams, not to name names, but they'll be like, oh, really? Yeah, we've been training on that hold for a year already. You're like, what? That's like, they're not public holds yet. Like, they're not available for sale. Like, how is this fair?
Would you prefer that in training everybody can train on the same holds, or would you prefer that you get to a competition and nobody has trained or seen any of the holds? Like, I guess if you had to choose one polar end of the spectrum there.
I think everybody should have access to the holds.
Yeah.
But in China, oftentimes, at least it's just not half the field knows the holds. Because I think that everybody having access to the holds, that would be my preference, because when you get to a comp, you don't want to see people falling just because they don't know the hold. You want it to be about strength and technique, not, oh, I grabbed the wrong part of the hold. Like that's just the most frustrating.
I was gonna say I'm realizing I'm a terrible fan of climbing, because part of me was like, I kind of want to see everybody's reaction to like hucking for a jug and then realizing it's not what it is at all. It just the angry guys on the circuit, just seeing them like next level frustrated would just be super funny. But that's probably a bad idea.
That's true.
I realized the question was probably weird, but I was thinking, well, if you go into a competition, you go out of isolation and you don't know what the boulder is or what the route is, like just another element of like mystery. You don't know the holds as well. You know, it would just make it sort of more challenging. But then
it makes it harder to solve in 5 minutes. And I would prefer that the sequence is the challenge you have to unlock in the 5 minutes, and not necessarily the hold, like where you grab the hold. But that's my personal opinion. I think one of my least favorite things is a really big hold in which you have one tiny little crimp that's the only good part. That is one of my worst pet peeves.
There were some...
I love, again, that's actually my favorite thing about gym climbing. But anyway, go ahead, John.
It kind of reminds me, I was just going to say, I was watching the Pan Ams before we did this. I was watching some of your climbs, and there were just some boulders that you like there would be just like a volume or a big macro, and there would be like this little screw-on jib, and you managed to like find it to do like subtle toe hooks and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess
it's different because you look at that and you look for the jibs to begin with. So if there's a jib, I knew that it was there. Whereas if it's a big hold and you've never seen it before, and you don't know that there's that one tiny crimp, like usually a jib will be at least visible.
Yeah. Well, and since you mentioned the 5 minute, the sort of time to do the boulders, I guess something that I'm always curious to hear is, what's your preference on the 4 or the 4+, the change in that? Which one would you prefer?
Bringing out the debate topics from the dead, pulling that one out from 2017.
Is that one dead for sure? I don't know.
For some of the first finals that I commentated, I had to, it was that year, and so I had to speak to that, and they really wanted us to push to really specifically talk about why 4 was more exciting. I I think there's merits for both. I do kind of like 4 because watching somebody run up the wall in the last like 10 seconds or try to do a slab really fast. There's one specific moment from a finals in Hachioji in a World Cup. It might have been, I think it was 2017 actually, and it was Tomoa did a slab boulder in like 9 seconds and nobody else did it in the entire 5 minutes. And I think that was the most exciting that I've ever seen. Whereas I also remember a moment in a 4+ comp where there was a climber who tried a boulder once, rested for 4 minutes or 3.5 minutes, got on with 2 seconds left and fell on the first move. And that was the worst. So
yeah, certainly a trade-off. That's funny. The one you bring up was the Hachioji World Cup with that like awesome send was also like the first time, maybe not ever, but the first time in this like current era where they split the men's and women's finals. So you had them running separately. And I just remember that I didn't notice that when I watched the comp because it was going for so long and I was so like just wrecked from this that I didn't even see it. I was probably like going to make like a 3rd bag of popcorn or something. Everybody was talking about it the next day. I'm like, what is this? I didn't even like notice this even happened. So yeah, that was a World Cup with a lot of like new stuff going on, but yeah, that was very cool.
Yeah, that first year when they split them was brutal. I remember like thinking it was horrible and wanting to fall asleep. But
yeah, I think I was anyway, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but let's get back on track because, yeah, we're just like scraping the surface right now. Before we go into the Olympic qualifying year, so you get that first place in 2017. You don't manage to match it for the rest of the year. And in fact, you still haven't matched.
Actually,
say again?
It was a 5th place.
Oh, what did I say?
First place.
Oh, sorry. I just meant finals. Sorry. This is quite a verbal typo. So you don't manage to match that high point and you haven't matched it yet, but I'm curious, like, did that bother you over the years that followed, or had your mindset switched to, okay, at this point I'm in the game for the Olympics and I'm not going to let that kind of thing, the fact that I haven't matched my peak, I'm not going to let that get in my way?
I've never really thought about it like that. I guess I was always just like, I want to make another final. Yeah, it doesn't really bother me. I know that every competition's different, every field is different, and since 2017 the field has gotten a lot bigger, deeper, stronger. Yeah. It doesn't bother me like that much.
It's something I've been wondering though, like for all of you athletes, once the Olympics become a thing, where is that weighted in your mind compared to World Cup circuit, World Cup, season championship, that sort of thing? Which one gets weighted heavier, or are they equal and you're able to kind of keep them both separate and equal at the same time?
Yeah, I think for me they are separate and equal because right now, focusing on competing at the Olympics, I have to do all 3 disciplines versus getting back to the World Cup circuit, I would probably just focus on bouldering. And that is something completely different than trying to do all 3 well, rather than just peaking for bouldering.
Okay, so if we're claiming that both of them are equal, then I have to make you make the decision. If you, this is kind of hard to imagine, but if you had the choice between an Olympic gold medal in the current format that it is, or a world championship medal specifically gold Olympic medal or a gold world championship medal in bouldering, which one would you take and why?
All right, so maybe they're not quite equal. It would for sure be Olympics because that's just, that event is for me on a slightly different level. I wanted to compete in the Olympics since, as a kid you want to compete in the Olympics, but having the Olympics in Vancouver when I was in high school was one of the most inspiring 2 weeks, or about 2 weeks of my life. I got to see a bunch of the events, and I watched the torch relay come, couple hundred meters from my house. I was really lucky to get tickets to the opening ceremonies, and I sat and I watched the entire athlete parade, which went on for hours, because I just wanted to be down there representing my country and being so proud to be there, just like all of the athletes down there were.
That's very cool. Yeah, as somebody that's a climbing fan, for me, I think of it as, the ultimate expression of being an incredible climber is a world championship medal, or like it's basically the same as a World Cup in my opinion, but for the sake of it, whatever. But I can't relate to being an athlete. It's not something I've ever been passionate about. But I can completely understand the gravity of the Olympic Games. Like, that's something that I hope one day that the premier climbing competitions can get somewhere close to that. Like, very few sports ever manage to achieve that kind of parity with the Olympics. But, the difference between like a Stanley Cup or a gold medal in Olympic hockey, that's a pretty good toss up, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people playing hockey that would prefer to win a Stanley Cup. And I think that's something worth striving for, because it really just means you're upping the quality of your competitions. Let's talk about the process. We won't belabor World Championships or Toulouse too much. Actually, let me ask this question. So, in Hachioji, you finished 14th in combined, so you didn't earn an Olympic berth at that event. In Toulouse, you finished 13th. You didn't earn a berth at that event either. You get to your last chance, basically, in Los Angeles. In the pre-qualifier, as I would say the favorite for this event, you finished 9th. In the qualifier, you finished 6th. Was there anywhere in that range, starting in Hachioji and ending with the qualifying round, where you're like, I'm not meeting my expectations?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Hachioji, I had a really good, before the combined format, like in bouldering, I had a really good finish. I came 7th. And I had a pretty good speed run. Lead was meh, but lead is often meh for me. And I actually got really, really sick. Like, I don't want to, make excuses, and I didn't complain for sure on the day, but I really was not feeling very well during the combined qualifier there. So I kind of gave myself a pass on that one. Toulouse, I was really hard on myself. I knew that I hadn't lived up to my expectation, because I really did, this whole leading up to the Olympic qualifiers, I thought that Toulouse was my big shot. And that's also why I gave myself such an easy pass on Hachioji, because I never expected to qualify there. That was never really even on my radar. It was always Toulouse for me. And then Pan Am's was always kind of almost like my backup in a way in my head. And so I think after Toulouse, I was pretty hard on myself, but also not overly so, because I knew I couldn't dwell. I had to keep moving forward if I wanted to actually qualify in LA. And it was actually my strategy, discussed with my coach, Andrew, and my mental coach, and my family and friends, that I was going to go into LA a little bit easy and not, give it 1,000% effort on the pre-qualifier and the qualifier, because I was decently sure that I would make it through to the finals. And of course, I barely did. So maybe I took it a little too easy. But yeah, so it was my strategy. It didn't stop me from having a complete meltdown in the middle of all of that, because I wasn't doing very well. And I just only to be reminded by literally everybody in my support network that I had told them that this was my plan. But
yeah, I want to talk a bit about your headspace when you're climbing, but also just like dealing with failure, which it sounds like is something that you have to cope with yourself. How would you kind of evaluate your headspace almost just tossed my phone off the desk. How would you lost my train of thought? If you were to be really critical of yourself, what are those biggest weaknesses in terms of just your mental state with climbing? It sounds like dealing with expectations might be one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think dealing with expectations is quite difficult for me. But in general, I'm actually pretty good headspace wise. I think ramping it up when I need to can be a challenge. In Toulouse, I don't think I just wasn't like on all the way. I was a little too mellow, a little too chill, a little too ready to just be like, oh, everything's okay. I just, I fell, but it's okay. But I think that's also the reason that I'm very good at the 5-on 5-off format, because my emotions are quite level most of the time. Not a lot of things will rattle me during the competition.
If you're in one of those like meltdown states that you mentioned, it sounded like you kind of needed some external help in that situation to kind of get yourself level. Would you say you have, let's say that happens again in whatever event, is there some kind of like internal protocol that you have for yourself when you're dealing with that sort of thing? How do you crawl out of that kind of hole?
Yeah, so I think it's an important distinction for me that I would never ever do that during a competition. In the middle of a competition, no way. That happens after.
Okay.
So for me, that was in between rounds, when I knew I had like a couple of days to get back on track. And for me, it always helps to talk it out with people close to me, or write it down in a journal or something. But for sure, during the competition, that would never, ever happen. I'm like way too focused and like methodical, logical, like, don't get emotional over this, because that's not going to help. That's absolutely, you're just going to lose it if you get emotional. The only way to have a chance of moving on, or winning or whatever, is to stay level.
What kind of things are you thinking about yourself and your climbing when you're in those really bad states? Like, what is it that you get critical of?
I'm just trying to think back to LA. It's mostly that I'm not, like I said about Toulouse, I'm not like fully there. I'm not ready to fight to the death, to not fall off. Definitely in bouldering, in both the pre-qualifier and the qualifier, I was just, I don't even know if I was fully warm. I was not. I was very like loose and just like, he fell off the final hold, like, damn. Not furious, but just like, oh well, that sucked.
In contrast, then, let's talk about the final round, which went really well for you. What was your, if was it the opposite in that case, where you did feel like excellent, everything was lined up and ready to go and you were just set, or was it mostly just that things worked out and you got a great set of boulders and you got a great lead climb and you had like an okay like speed situation? Was it you all coming back, or did it all just kind of like work out?
Probably a combination. I got a really good set of boulders for me. But I fully showed up that day. I was ready to compete. And I was 100% focused on the day. Nothing could rattle me. I actually had a terrible warm-up. I don't think I've ever told anybody that, but for bouldering, I was falling off boulders that I had done super easily, like in street shoes, in the pre-qualifier and qualifier warm-ups. So I was just,
That sounds terrifying.
oh, horrible. I just went back to my very first, no, my second World Cup of the 2016 season. And Michaela Tracy from the UK, we were in warming up for semifinals, and she told me something I'll never forget. She's like, never try your boulders from qualifiers when you're warming up for semis. There is no positive outcome from that. If you do it again, whatever, and if you fall on it, you're terrible that day. That's what you think in your head. So I was like, you're just an idiot. Like, come on, don't try your old boulders.
That's excellent advice. I really like that, actually. That's probably pretty helpful for a lot of people. Yeah, once you set any kind of bar for yourself on something, I guess that can really affect your head state.
Yeah.
John, do you have anything about the Pan Am Championship?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, but my audio was kind of glitching up there. Alannah, I want to hear what your thoughts were going into the lead climbing specifically. You had to, I think Contreras, her high point was like 52 or something like that on the finals of the Pan Am. And I'm curious, like, how much you knew that you needed to, get to a certain point, or just kind of your thought process as you were tying in, as you were walking up. What was going through your head?
I was nervous for sure when I was waiting behind or in ISO. I always get like the full body shakes before lead climbing. But I had been working a lot this year on meditation and grounding myself. So I was doing a lot of that. Actually, the whole day I was, which really helped my headspace. But when I walked up to the wall, I was pretty confident, I guess. You kind of always take a quick glance up to see if you can see any like swinging draws. And all I saw was, I was kind of looked up and I was like, I think they're all swinging. Oh, wow. Like, all right, but if she can do it, I can do it. If she can get that high, there's no reason I can't. So I think that was an important thing for me, is to always, you might have an idea of where other people got, but use it as inspiration, like as motivation.
Mm-hmm. And then you get the high point, and you're being lowered. I told Tyler, I was texting Tyler as it happened. I was saying, like, this is going to be replayed as one of the greatest Olympic moments, because it was an Olympic qualifying event. And I was like, this is spectacular.
I couldn't read your text through the tears. It was just like,
well, it was just, even Charlie Bosco and Megan Martin on commentary, like, they were emotional. It was just amazing, but it looked like it didn't hit you at first. You're kind of being lowered, or at least if it did hit you, you weren't outwardly emotional. And then, of course, like, you just like, you get a standing ovation. And so if you could walk through what was going through your head, you told us about, like, sort of when you're going to the lead wall. Now, when you get the high point and you're coming down, what's going through your head?
Okay, I guess, well, I'll start maybe just before the high point. I had maybe hole number 51 with my right hand, and I put my right heel up, and 52 was right next to it. And I looked at that hold and I was like, I don't really like it, but this heel hook feels really comfy. So I'm just going to rock over it and see what happens. And I was like, oh, it's even more comfy. Like, I'll just keep rocking over it. And I actually had no idea that I had just hit the high point. I was like, oh, people are cheering. That's nice. But I don't know, my brain's not fully working, at that point. I'm more thinking about the climb. And then as I was getting lowered, I was more just mad that I fell on that move. Because if you look, like, there's a right foothold that I did not step on. And I looked at it and I went, I'm too pumped. If I try to get my foot up, I'm going to fall getting my foot up rather than getting the plus. But then I was being lowered and I was like, come on, like, you could have just gritted your teeth and just got your foot up. It would have been fine. You probably would have gone a couple more moves. I was berating myself. So I actually had no idea. And then it was Becca that told me on the ground. And I had no idea. I actually wasn't even thinking about it. I was just thinking about how stupid I was for not getting my foot up.
All right. That happens. You know you're going to the Olympics. How much time did you have? I guess the question is, did you have any time to start thinking about your life as somebody preparing for the Olympics before you started hearing word that the Olympics is being discussed, being postponed? The Canadian team is talking about not sending athletes regardless. Did you get like any window of kind of enjoying yourself before that all started to kind of like fall apart?
Oh, barely. I actually did. I was so psyched when I got home. My coach, Andrew was like, "Oh, you should take some time off," and I was like, "No, I was in pain." But I did take a week off. I went to selection camp, just to be there, really, to hang out. And then it was still okay. We had flown to Ottawa and back. It was the weekend after Pan Am's. We had heard about coronavirus, but I wasn't worried flying at all. And then it was a week after that everything shut down or something like that. Yeah, I barely got to, enjoy it or even think about it before everything seemed up in the air. But that's okay. I now have another year to prepare. I'm happy with that, as long as, it ensures that more people don't die. Very happy.
Yeah, John mentioned in his notes, and this is one is how did you reconcile those two things with the possibility of the Olympics being canceled? Or actually, probably the more probable one was there was that point where the Canadian athletes were talking about, if you hold the Olympics, we're not going to go. So in that scenario, the Olympics still happen, but you aren't going, even though days ago you earned your spot at being an Olympian. I really want to know how you were thinking about that when that was briefly a possibility.
Yeah, luckily it was a really short time period. It was less than 24 hours, I think, before the IOC announced that they would be postponing. But initially, Andrew called me to tell me just a couple hours before the public announcement, and my initial reaction was tears. But I absolutely understood the decision and supported it. I was, behind it 100%. I still am.
All right. Let's talk. We're getting to the point where we're like almost running out of time. So I want to save we have some like viewer questions that I want to talk about. So I'm just going to kind of run through some like faster questions. First of all, just some stuff about World Cup, some like really quick questions you can answer as in detail as you want or not. So just about the tour in general, we were curious about some of your favorites. So we were going to ask you like your favorite World Cup, but we obviously have to be a little bit more specific about that. So first of all, curious, your favorite host city of a World Cup. What's your favorite city to go to for a climbing event?
Ooh. Tokyo is hard to beat.
Favorite crowd, if you can think of one.
If I was ever lucky enough to climb in the finals of Chamonix.
Okay. Is that a goal for yourself?
It's a very, long shot goal, but one day maybe.
Cool. And then your favorite isolation zone.
Oh. I seem to remember Munich was really nice, really big and spread out, good food, but I actually haven't been there for quite a few years.
Actually, let's talk about that for a second. When you go into isolation, is it normal that you have all this food provided and stuff? And what kind of stuff do they normally have? And is it stuff that you would eat anyways, or do you have your own kind of like bags of stuff squirreled away?
You usually bring food just in case, but there's always like fruit and water, and usually like crackers and some candy. So good things for quick energy. I think Munich will have like sandwiches and stuff, which is nice. Japan tends to have very small things, or they cut things like a tiny little ring, a tiny little coin of banana. And you're like, really? Like, can I not have more banana than this?
And
Alannah, when you said that you have been kind of getting into like meditation, and you said at the Pan Ams you meditated before the finals and stuff. Is that like in ISO you just kind of find a private space and just kind of sit there and get into the zone, and people don't bother you and let you meditate there?
Yeah, there was really no private spaces. The isolation zone for Pan Ams was very, very small. Although, by the time you got to finals, it felt roomy because there were only 8 athletes versus in the pre-qualifier, it was insane. I think I just sat on a chair and I told Sean, who was there as a coach, and the physio in ISO, I just said, like, I'm just meditating, like, don't bother me, and hopefully nobody kicks me. So it's really loud. There's like tons of movement, and it's not very comfortable, but it works.
And the other question, just in this vein of favorites, and I'm going to state the question, but then just kind of like ask you about the question itself, is if you have a favorite climber to compete against. And I feel like that might get thought of as like just somebody, like a friend of yours that you really like climbing with, because like a bouldering comp, you are basically just climbing with friends. But do you have somebody that you find either inspires you when you're climbing against them, or you just want to beat them every single time, and it's like a some kind of grudge? But is there somebody that it kind of brings you up a level when you're competing against this person?
I don't know. I think for me, competing is so much internal. It's not like you're competing against other people. You're always competing against the boulder. I really like having certain people in the warm-up area. So in my first World Cup back at competing, Vera
Zylstra,
yeah, from the Netherlands, she was so smiley in the isolation zone and in the on-deck chairs, and it made me feel so comfortable and so at home. Then looking around, everybody else was so serious, looking like so suspiciously at other people. So ever since then, she's, I every time I see her, just huge smiles, which is really, really nice. And then I have, I'm really good friends with a girl from Switzerland, Natalie Bergschi, who doesn't compete that often anymore. She's really busy with school and work, but when she does, that's always really nice to have her there. And I really also like warming up with Shauna.
Cool. John, I think what I'm going to do is we have a bunch of questions kind of under the future label. And then after that, if you want to run through the viewer questions. So let me slay through a couple of these.
Sure.
And then we'll go. Yeah. Okay. So looking towards the future, and I'm actually not going to talk that much about the Olympics because I want to get to some of these maybe a little bit more like Canada related. But for yourself, first of all, do you have any goals, whether they're personal or climbing or professional, for beyond the Olympic Games right now? Or is that kind of like your wall of where your current reality ends until you've dealt with that really big thing?
I have some very vague, nebulous goals of, going back and actually getting a job that uses my mechanical engineering degree, somehow combines climbing and engineering. Something to do in the outdoor industry would be amazing.
Okay.
Very vague.
Let's talk a bit about that. So you did some work on a project. It seemed like it basically was a reactive climbing wall that could basically tell when you were gripping on holds. I think it was like a piezoelectric. I don't know how to pronounce that. Yeah. Piezo. Sorry. So do you find that there is a crossover between the interest in climbing and the interest in mechatronics, where you are fascinated, or you often find yourself thinking about?
There can be, and there's also a lot that's not. Climbing in its purest forms have nothing to do really with engineering. If you're trad climbing, obviously there's a lot of engineering going into the gear. But say if you're bouldering, not really. I think there's a lot of crossover in training tools, and that's where I'm really interested in.
Okay. We talked a bit about your outlook on future in climbing back when you finished high school and you were going to university, and that the outlook was, I don't think there's much more left in the world of competitive climbing. Has that changed now? Like, do you even consider the possibility of when the Olympics is over, I'm going to keep being a competitor? Do you consider beyond your competitive career trying to work in climbing? Like you already mentioned that would stay as an interest, but you see some athletes staying and working for the IFSC, staying and getting really involved in the national federation. Is that something that you would even entertain, or do you think you are probably headed towards an engineering field of work?
It's something that I've thought about for sure. I think I want to pursue engineering for a while. I mean, I put a lot of time and effort. Like, it took me 7 years to get my degree, and I didn't ever fail a course. I never changed degrees. I just went really slowly so that I could train at the same time. I did co-op or an internship, and I went to Switzerland for a year. So, yeah, I've considered a lot of things, and right now my focus is on competing for now and coaching as well. I coach the local youth climbing team, and I'm for sure going to continue that for the foreseeable future.
You've trained around the world in Canada, and then also your time in Europe, and you spent a lot of time with different coaches and different athletes. When you've seen the different infrastructures, the different countries and different areas use for how they train athletes, is there anything that you'd really like to bring back to Canada or BC or just like the Vancouver area? You mentioned the way that Switzerland structured their elite team, which is something we obviously don't do here. And we probably have some geographic hurdles that makes that particular implementation really difficult. But are there things where you're like, man, I really wish I had that when you were the young climber that you want to bring over?
There are a couple things. I think the really tall lead walls. I mean, we grew up with 30-foot tall lead walls, and I
which
think
was usually actually like 25 feet, but on the website it had to say 30 or whatever. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that if we started our youth climbers climbing on tall walls, on 60-foot tall walls, and not making lead climbing scary for them or sound scary, just introducing it as like a normal part of climbing, I think we would have a lot more good youth lead climbers and good lead climbers, just not even youth, just coming up through the ranks. I hear very often that kids these days are scared of lead climbing, so they're just like, oh, well, then I'll just boulder. It's fine. Because that's an option for them now.
I'm realizing when you were a youth, there were no world championships that actually included bouldering.
No,
I guess it was lead only, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very recently. It was only
2015, lead. I think. Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, let's. We had some interesting questions from people. We've pared it down to a shorter list. I think some of them we may have kind of gone over. Okay, first one from Basham. I'll start with this one, John. You can do the rest.
All right.
Oh no, we did actually go over this. It was basically like, would you intend on attending some World Cups if you were going to the Olympics that season? So we already kind of talked about that. So yeah, John, I'll just let you take it from here, and good luck with these ones.
All right, I will. So I find that sometimes when people write in, some people want me to withhold the username and other people don't. So I'm just going to withhold the name for all these people so nobody gets, whatever. So this one, as it's worded here, I'll read it. Thanks for writing in. It says, my climbing partner wants to know what's Alannah's go-to exercise for a strong back? My climbing partner is very jealous of Alannah's muscles. So, strong back exercise.
Climbing? Probably the most fun one.
Yeah. With that. Any sort of do you do any sort of cross training, I guess, with like for your back, any like weights or just anything other than climbing that you sort of isolate your back muscles for?
Yeah, I do strength and conditioning with a strength and conditioning coach a couple times a week during the course of the year, and I've been doing that for years. Part of it is I naturally build muscle really easily. Like I've had defined biceps since I was like 11 years old. It's like really weird, but I don't know. I do a lot of different types of exercises, but climbing would be the most regular one, and I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good. Let's see here. How do you stay focused on your training without comparing yourself to other people's progress? That's a good question.
I actually try not to spend a lot of time on social media. I don't post as much as other people, and I don't do the stories as much as other people. It just isn't a huge part of my life. I made a conscious decision to do that in about 2017, to look other places for entertainment and for happiness, and to do other things to balance out my life. So I really, really like to trail run and mountain bike and ski, both resort and backcountry. So doing other things that are not climbing and not focusing on that exclusively, and pegging myself as I'm a climber and only a climber, and finding my happiness from only that. I think that's helped a lot for me. But I think the biggest thing is if you're struggling with comparing yourselves to other people, remember that Instagram is a highlight reel, and also you don't need to look at it.
Good. What song
these
are
last
you,
two are basically
what song,
the same. I was going to say, just like ask them kind of as one, I guess.
Okay. What books and shows or music is getting you through the pandemic shutdown, lockdown?
I don't listen to a ton of music. I kind of listen to whatever's on, but I never really, other people will put it on. Just kind of, I know I'm kind of weird like that, but I like podcasts. I really like NPR podcasts right now, like Hidden Brain. And I read, and my favorite are biographies. I recently read Shoe Dog about Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. I read Rafa about Rafael Nadal. I guess those are the two most recent books that I've read. So biographies, especially sports-related biographies, are, they fascinate me.
Any like movies or TV shows that I don't even know if you allow yourself to binge watch anything. If you don't even look at Instagram, I feel like you're probably not that active on Netflix. But
we usually watch like a show a night, like an episode. We watched a little bit of Suits, but that got a little bit boring. I really like watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and just recently started Ozark.
Oh yeah, with Jason Bateman. I haven't watched that yet, but yeah, I've heard good things. Cool.
I've watched 2 episodes so far. So.
Cool. That's pretty much where we're going to end.
One more question. Oh, sorry. I know that I texted Tyler. It was like serendipitous that just recently the IFSC released this, it's called Golden Memories. It's like a highlight reel of your Pan Am performance. Have you had a chance, speaking of watching things, have you gone back and watched, if not the whole Pan Ams, have you watched that highlight reel of just your finals?
I watched the highlight reel, when it came out the other day. It's a little embarrassing to watch a video that's just of you, though. So
Does it make you as emotional as the rest of us get when we rewatch that?
Oh yeah, I get tears in my eyes every time. And my mom will text me if she ever watches it too, and we'll say the same things.
Yeah. I'm actually going to end on one last question, an entirely selfish question. John and I have been in the same boat, and because you do some coaching, I wanted to ask for coaches that have a crop of kids that were recreational climbers and they're getting really good, and now they're starting to get into competition. So you're kind of making a kind of change in how you coach them, what your intent is as you coach them. Do you have any advice for coaching in that kind of cohort of young climbers that are starting to take a more competitive look at things? Because I used to do it. I felt like I never got good at it. I know John's doing some of that right now. And I think it's, especially from your perspective, I think you might have some interesting ideas.
I think not taking it too seriously, even as a coach, not like trying not to let them take it too seriously and not focusing only on their climbing. Always ask them and make it like be interested in other parts of their lives so they know that their worth to you is not only based on their competition results. I know we've had the issue that some of them, it seems like the messaging that they get sometimes from some of their parents is like that. And, you know, as a coach, I want to make sure that I'm never showing that or making them feel like I only care about their competition results, and letting them know that in as many words too.
Cool.
It's like, it doesn't matter to me how you do in this comp. I want you to try your hardest and have fun, but that's all
Cool.
If there's been anything positive from this pandemic or a silver lining, I suppose it's been that with some of the competitors that have done interviews on social media or like their stories for their day, what they're doing as they're cooped up, it's been really interesting and fun for me to see just like the things that competitors on the IFSC do that are not climbing related, or even in this case, hearing about your engineering degree, or like, Sean McCall is, he's like an accomplished piano player and stuff like that. I feel like we're kind of getting to see some of the more diverse aspects of the personality of all these people on the circuit, just because they're home, they're binging, movies and shows like everybody else and doing hobbies and stuff like that. So it's been cool.
Okay, let's wrap it up. I know you actually have to go off and do some coaching, so we'll call it there. So first of all, thank you everybody for watching. You can follow Alannah at Alannah_Yip on Instagram, although apparently she doesn't use it. And if you write her a comment, she probably won't look at it for 2 weeks. So maybe not. Maybe just ignore it completely. But no, you can find her there. Follow along on her Olympic journey, obviously. Thanks, John, as always, as well. You can buy his book at Amazon, and there's a link in the description box below. Thank you, Alannah, for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it was really fun.
Yeah, we won't bother you again until after the Olympics, I promise. So you've got like a year and a half before I start Instagram messaging you, which now I realize why it was so futile, but I'm glad we managed to connect and get this done. Thank you very much for watching, whether you're watching live or watching it recorded. If you enjoy talking about this kind of stuff, join the Plastic Weekly Discord, where we're just talking about everything about indoor climbing. And of course, if you want to support Plastic Weekly, you can always check out the Patreon as well. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.